Plato's Cave is produced by Muckraker Media. You can find out more at muckrakermedia.org. Welcome to Plato's Cave. I'm Jordan Myers, and today we're going to take another step towards exiting the cave by learning about the Zimbardo and Milgram experiments. I talked with my two friends from That's BS, Adam and Giffen, about these experiments and how they relate to obedience, authority, and moral responsibility. I really hope you enjoy this. I learned a lot researching for this episode, and I think it has pretty relevant implications for modern day. So with that, I really hope you enjoy this episode, and here it is. Okay, so we'll start it off. Basically, what I was thinking would make the most sense for this, and feel free to jump in if I'm missing anything, or you think we should cover a specific part of this. But basically, I think what we should do is explain first the Milgram experiment because it came chronologically first. And there are some discussions of that I think we can just go into on its own terms, and then maybe bring in the Zimbardo prison experiment, and then I think the juxtaposition of both those experiments bring up interesting questions we can discuss. Okay, so basically, the two experiments that I'm referencing are the Milgram experiments that started in 1961 and the Zimbardo Stanford prison experiment that was in 1971. So basically, I'll just explain the Milgram experiment, and I don't have any notes in front of me, so if I forget something, just chime in, either of you. But
sure.
So basically, Stanley Milgram in 1961 was at Yale University, and he devised this experiment to look at how people obey authority, basically. So what he did was he got random individuals. I think there was a pretty big mix of people, right? There were Yale students, but then there were also just people from the community at large.
Sure.
And basically what he did is he screened them first. So these were all psychologically healthy individuals. So there was no mental disorders in the group that he allowed to take part in this experiment, which I think is relevant. And basically what he did was he brought people in to participate in what they believed to be a learning experiment. And what they thought they would be doing is administering shocks of various levels to someone on the other side of a wall or in another room who was basically what they believed to be taking a test. And if they got the wrong answer on that test, they were supposed to administer shocks to that person at increasing levels. And there was an experimenter, someone conducting the experiment in the room with these individuals, prodding them to continue. So basically, the reality of it is there was no one. The learner was not an actual person. Basically, it was just a recording that had been previously made of someone, getting the answers wrong. Right. So the experimenter. So just to recap, so there's three people. Well, there's two people.
It was just a recording. I thought it was an actor.
No, it was a recording because
Okay.
I think they wanted the responses to be even across all the participants.
That makes sense. Okay.
An actor was hired to make the recording, perhaps.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure they had a human make the recordings.
Yeah. But an actor.
Could have been Milgram himself.
Yeah. That's okay. Fair enough. Actually,
not an actor. Thank you.
So basically, they had the experimenter telling the teacher, and the teacher here is the people who were the participants in the experiment, thinking that they were teaching this learner. I don't know what the actual questions were about, but basically, so the learner would get it wrong, and they would have to increase these shocks that they delivered. So I think they started out. I can't remember exactly where the shock started out, but it was fairly low. It was was like a 20-volt shock or something, which is apparently it feels like a flick, like if someone flicks you really hard on the arm or something. Like it's not pleasant, but it's definitely not like real pain. And they increased, so there was like a dial, and I think there were 30 something settings on this dial, and the experimenter forced these teachers to run through them all, and they got up to I think 450 volts.
Yeah.
But they weren't. So what's important here is that the instructor or the experimenter informed these participants that the shocks would be severely painful at the higher degrees, but that they were not lethal or to be causing permanent damage. Although the highest rated shock was labeled, I think, XXX.
No,
And
danger.
I think the one before that was labeled extreme danger or something.
XXX? Did you and I read the same article?
I think well, so the other thing too is there were many versions of this experiment. But so okay, maybe I'm wrong, but I thought the highest rated shock was like XXX. The one before that said extreme danger. The one before that said like danger or something like that. So basically what would happen is like they would shock them at a lower level, and like a recording would play of the guy going like or like just kind of like a low level reaction, and each shock that they successively administered to the person had to be increased in voltage, and then the sound that they would hear back got increasingly panicked, right? It was just they would hear like the people would scream or the recording would scream, like he would just cry out like more and more like more and more urgently. And at one point I think he said like please stop, I have a heart condition, or like I don't want to continue with this experiment. They would get more and more desperate, right? And at some point the recording would I think it just stopped responding, right?
It did. I think at the highest levels, I believe like the response from like the learner was silence.
Mm-hmm. And so
after desperation.
Yep, exactly. And so what would happen is the experimenter would prompt the participant, if they sort of, like it was recorded that almost everyone sort of like, would look up at like the experimenter at like, like the higher levels and like just kind of look for like reinforcement or reassurance or something. And they would say that the experiment requires that you continue. And so, even when people distance to it, they'd be like, I don't know if I'm really comfortable with this. And they would say, like this experiment demands that you continue. The experiment requires that you continue. Like a really impersonal command, basically, just to continue. But the important thing is that also they were paid before the actual experiment began, and they said that they would be able to keep the money no matter if they stopped at any point or not. So he kind of perfectly segmented out the concern of like getting paid for the study as well. So basically, unless I kind of forgot anything, that is the basic setup of the experiment, and the results were pretty bad. It was the cool part is Milgram asked his fellow psychologists at Yale how many people he thought would go past a certain point. And overwhelmingly, everyone thought that people would stop at a very low level. Basically, like as soon as the guy was expressing real like discomfort or the first time he asked people to stop, almost everyone thought that the participants would stop the experiment. But in his first set of experiments, 65% of the participants administered the experiment's final massive 450-volt shock. And almost everyone, and in the first one at least, everyone went at least past 300 volts. Some subjects were uncomfortable doing so and displayed varying degrees of tension and stress. These signs included sweating, trembling, stuttering, biting their lips, groaning, and digging their fingernails into their skin. and some were even having nervous laughters or seizure fits. So like people were I mean just like, really really shaken by this, but almost everyone continued to a very high level or all the way. And basically, from doing a little extra reading, it seemed like basically once you got past a pretty low level, you were almost, it was a very good predictor of whether you would actually go until the end, right? So like if you got past like 120 volts or something like that, almost everyone who passed that mark went to 450 volts, which is the final level. So unless I'm forgetting anything major that you two can see, I think that's basically the way the experiment went down, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it seems to be
Okay.
pretty succinct.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I was
so
gonna add.
oh yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if you want to discuss this moment, but
Sure.
another probably important piece of context is like its relation to like Nazi Germany. I don't know if you want to touch on that now or later.
Yeah, we can definitely get into that now. The first thing I was sort of interested in, um, well, it does, I mean, it does kind of directly tie into that, is it seems like it's interesting to me that like the people in this experiment showed such extreme signs of discomfort. Like he said, people were, sweating, trembling,
Yeah.
stuttering. And it would be surprising, I guess, if people didn't show those signs. But if you were the person on the other side of the wall, it kind of doesn't really matter if those people are showing discomfort or not, right? It almost matters what they're doing more than.
For you, certainly.
Well, yeah,
I'm
yeah,
not sure how
certainly.
much you're going to be able to like, take comfort in the fact as you're like take your dying breath that he trembled a bit,
Well,
as he
that's what
pulled
I'm
the
saying. Like
lever.
it wouldn't matter to you at all, right? Um, like it wouldn't matter to me at all, for instance, if I was on the other side of the wall, and just to know that like in my last moments, oh thank God, he at least didn't feel good about this, like as I was just shocked to death.
It might give me one small modicum of, you know, value.
I don't know.
Might value it very
Maybe.
small, but something.
Maybe. But I think it's really interesting that, and Giffen, you can bring up whatever points you want to discuss with this. It seems just like interesting that I think to the victims, and this is obviously we Giffen's already alluded to it, but this ties in directly with what happened in Nazi Germany and the Holocaust. But it almost seems it matters, but it seems pretty inconsequential how the people felt about what they were doing compared to what they actually ended up doing. So, Giffen, what was your like question you want to discuss about the Holocaust in general?
Yeah, I just kind of wanted to tie in the context because that's like important context for like this experiment
Yeah.
is like the I don't know if I want to say goal of, but kind of trying to get a further understanding of how, like quote unquote, an average like German soldier
Mhm.
would be able to follow through with what we would probably agree are just atrocious crimes.
Oh yeah.
Slaughter, genocide,
Yeah.
murder, whatever it happened to be in the instance.
Mhm.
And,
And,
and
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 yeah,
also to be totally clear, this experiment was inspired by the Nuremberg trials.
it was, yeah.
It was, yeah.
It
So
began three
Good
months
note.
after, I think, right? Something like that.
I
I
don't
I
know.
I just know that in the intro of that piece you sent us that they
Yeah.
said that Milgram was inspired by the Nuremberg trials and immediately began work on this to
Yeah.
kind of see the psyche of people.
No,
So
that's true. So one thing that I thought was super interesting about this is I don't know if this was in the pieces that I shared with you guys or not, but what was super interesting, and this is directly relates to the Holocaust and what the German citizenry basically did, is like I said, Milgram ran something like 40 different iterations of this study, and he showed that one of the variables that actually determined how high people would shock their victims is the uniform that the experimenter was wearing. So
mm,
basically, if the experimenter was wearing like a very, like well ironed, well fitting white lab coat, um, the people would feel pressure to actually go farther in the in the experiment, versus I don't remember what the other option was, but maybe it was something like a sweater or like kind of civilian clothes,
Sure.
um, which is
And
just
that was and
really, yeah.
that
Oh,
was
go ahead.
true across the board for, all variables that indicated authority.
Yeah.
Like it was location, whether the experimenter was present or not. You know what I mean? Because
Hmm.
sometimes they would like phone in
Yeah.
orders, But yeah, so if there was kind of direct indicators of authority, people were more likely to follow through all the way. So,
Yeah. And it also depended upon the prestige of the university that the
mhm.
instructor was from. So if they were from
Oh,
Yale, uh, the people went farther than it was just some unknown university. Was the other example, um, which I just think is like I think that's extremely telling, both for, I mean, the specific instance that we're relating this to, which is Nazi Germany, but just, I mean, how people obey authority in general. Um, if you, I mean, I know there's all those psychological studies that just show, if you're like an attractive, tall, kind of like, empowered looking man, then you're way more convincing to people than, like a small, unattractive, like maybe like overweight person, right? They like there's a bunch of studies that have shown
Disheveled
that.
appearance, kind of
Yeah, yeah,
all
like
kind of
people
like
just
factors.
exactly. If they say the exact same thing, people will remember and respect uh things said by people who are like physically larger and more like attractive looking, which is just interesting.
and
Um
also just to throw in is this kind of ties into the authority angle as well.
mm,
But if the researcher explicitly stated that they would take on any kind of repercussions for whatever happened to the patient, then the person was more likely to continue rather than if the experimenter said, "Hey, whatever happens, it's on you."
yeah,
So when people could, pass responsibility, then they were more likely to continue as well.
yeah, that's a really good point too.
Yeah, great
Um
point.
and it seems like, I don't know, I think this is like, you know, it's a really popularized example, but I think it's popularized for a reason. That if if you're put in a position where, and this is interesting where it gets juxtaposed to the Zimbardo prison experiments, but um, because I think, I mean, what the Milgram experiments were really trying to show, and I think they did show quite well, was like the mere presence of an authority figure telling you to do something is oftentimes all that's required for you to basically abandon your previous morals or previous like viewpoints on things. Because I mean, presumably, I mean, you have to believe that like these people wouldn't, you know, like I think it's obvious that these people like were extremely uncomfortable with what they were doing, and you didn't have just sadists who wanted to shock people in general participating in this study.
Sure.
Um, so it's just super interesting to me that like the the mind is that pliable, just to be like kind of commandeered by such a simple thing as like a white lab coat, and just someone saying the experiment requires that you continue. Because I mean, presumably, that's the crazy thing. These people had to believe they were actually killing other participants, right? Like
Yeah,
that's
you're
not
right.
a far reach.
You're right.
Well,
There was like a lower point that said danger, but the final one at 450 was XXX. So you are pulling on someone with XXX at that point. Like I want I mean I don't think I'd pull it. I don't know.
So
But
see,
that's
yeah,
okay. That was
okay, but
something I wanted to discuss too.
okay,
Yeah,
okay. But Giffen
yeah.
had a point. I'm sorry, Giffen.
no, I wanted to hear your point as well, but I did want to make kind of like a best case scenario for I don't even know really what position this is, but kind of playing devil's advocate.
Hmm.
Um, so one, to compare again, let's keep with the comparison to Nazi Germany.
Mm.
I think a soldier who is like told to like do against the wall, has a higher degree of certainty of his actions than the experimenter in like Milgram's experiment, because he only got auditory cues.
Yep.
And I think that's important to at least bring up.
Mm-hmm.
But also, though, I would say the authority is even stronger, though, when you're surrounded by people with guns who will put you down for, subverting some greater authority like the Nazi regime. You know what I mean?
I don't know.
It's otherwise just an experimenter. I'm not saying that there isn't authority there. There is obviously major authority, as we saw from the experiment, but I think there's even more authority when superiors can literally kill you if you don't follow through.
Well,
I want to
real quick, just to like address Adam's point. I know this wasn't I don't think this was in the show notes that I sent to you guys, but in my History of World War II class, I believe this was in the book Ordinary Men by Browning.
right.
Because another subtext of this conversation is the Goldhagen versus Browning debate on like the German civilians in Nazi Germany. But I believe this is in the book Ordinary Men. But to your point, Adam, where the German soldiers were threatened with death, that's definitely true. But it wasn't true at every point in time across every unit. So, for instance, I know that in the beginning stages of the final solution, when German soldiers in the Gestapo were rounding up Jews to send to concentration camps and even executing some in the ghettos, what they actually did was, I believe, like the German commander of each troop would say, if any of you want to leave, you can, and there'll be no repercussions. You can go back and join like the regular portion of the army. But if you stay, we're going to be like doing some things as a group that you need to be all in on. And no one left. In most units, at least, no one chose to leave. And so obviously, I think we could assume that there are people who wanted to leave, who probably it was like there was a real struggle there of like, okay, knowing that I'm going to have to kill like people that they might not have viewed them as people, but even still, like knowing we're going to have to kill Jews that we just rounded up, I'm not actually comfortable with doing that. And maybe some of them believed that it was a trick and they would be killed if they did try to leave. But I think, you gotta think that there was at least a sizable portion of individuals who believed that they could freely leave, but chose not to, just out of, I don't know, camaraderie. Yeah.
So that's a good point, but I think that also misses the fact that you can agree to things without actually being in the presence of the people that you're actually going to kill. So like if you can say, okay, I'm all in on this, but when it comes down to it, like to actually gas them or shoot them, you don't have a choice at that point. You've already agreed.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So I do believe that like Giffen brought up the point that, in the experiment, people were only getting sort of like an auditory feedback. But my point is that once they finally get to the point where they have both the visual and the auditory, and just every sense they're being exposed to the person they're about to kill, they didn't really have much of a choice at that point.
You're right. You're right. Yeah. And the thing about the experiment too, though, is, to make it more visceral, they did have the recordings of the guy say, like, please stop, I have a heart condition, like I'm feeling unwell, I want this experiment to stop. So, yes, obviously it's just audio, it's not, visual data as well, but I don't know, like imagine being the person in that scenario. You're hearing those cries from someone on the other side of the wall. That's gotta be pretty damn close to knowing you're killing him at that point too. I
want to push back against knowing, because let me make a best case pitch for one of the people who pulled it all the way to the XXX, right? Mm-hmm. So they have trust in the establishment that they're at, whether that be like the university they're at, whether, again, we mentioned previously that you're more willing to go farther the more prestigious the university. So if I was sitting there, I'd be like, okay, well, there's a good chance that what I'm being tested for, it, might be like my response. I highly doubt any kind of experiment would be allowed to partake in which people died. So I feel like the risk of me killing someone right now in reality might be lower than just in a vacuum the audio feedback might be, alluding to.
Yeah, see, I don't know about that, because this was in 1961. So I
Yeah.
think the general population probably knew very little about social psychology compared to what parts of the general population may know today. So I'm not sure if they would really
Probably.
kind of. I'm
You're right.
not
That
sure that.
on that point, yes, but I also
Yeah,
think there was a higher trust in institutions in the early '60s, especially.
definitely fair.
So that might overcome like the social awareness of social experimentation.
Yeah,
With like institutional trust.
I think that's definitely fair.
Like,
Sorry,
and
Adam, did I
you
cut you
just
off?
justify it a little bit, just like, come on, they wouldn't let it happen if it was actually, killing people. So therefore, it's not perfect logic, but this is the kind of justification that some of those individuals must have done. Adam,
I do agree with Jordan in the sense though that I doubt any of the participants realized that they were being monitored on their response, because I feel like that's just us in the 21st century. You know, we're
That's
privy to all these past experiments, so we know what goes on in social psychology labs. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
we kind of have an idea of what they're looking for. I mean, I could be wrong, but I just didn't get the sense from watching some of these videos of the actual experiment these people knew what they were being tested on.
Yeah.
So
Okay, that's fair. I think I'll have to give that point to you guys on that. Like the awareness of the social or psychological testing was probably super low.
yeah,
If zero in the general population.
yeah.
But what did you think about the like institutional trust as a reasonable like justification for going all the way?
Yeah. So I think that's a really good point, Giffen. I think that in the past people definitely had more just general trust in institutions than we do now, maybe. But
Mhm.
I can't really disagree with Adam's point that this is actually a really good scalable experiment because, as he said, obviously the stakes are higher and more visceral. Like you actually have to, in Nazi Germany, people were, shooting prisoners in the back of the head or in the face.
Or civilians.
It, well, yeah, exactly, or civilians, versus, cranking a dial from the other side of a wall. So in that sense, what the Germans soldiers did was more extreme, but also, as Adam said, the authority was more extreme, and you have to imagine the trust in that authority was more extreme too, right? So I think both aspects of this scale pretty nicely.
See, I'm not sure about that because I want to take it back to my like perspective I brought up earlier about
Mm.
like certainty and like risk kind of assessment. Um, Even if you trusted the authority, like you were just a super nationalistic, patriotic German, you there was that didn't really conflict with like your certainty of what you were doing. Now it might have influenced like whether you viewed the subject as human or not, obviously. Um, but again, I think if I was behind a wall, I was only getting auditory feedback. I think that's different because there's a lot of uncertainties in that scenario. If you're a soldier, you've been trained for this for month. You enlisted knowing that you'd have to kill.
Well,
You
a
have
lot of them
killed
didn't
before,
enlist,
maybe.
actually.
A lot of what?
So soldiers did
Oh,
not enlist.
that
Yeah, yeah,
that's a good point. That is a very good point.
yeah.
Um,
I think it's also important to recognize, Giffen, that I mean, although these people I think your argument is that participants wouldn't have assumed that they were doing any real damage to someone because they
yeah,
trusted the authority of the university. But
right.
I think it's important to note though that they must have still thought they were doing damage. You know what I mean? Like maybe not they weren't killing the person, but you had someone screaming in pain asking them to stop. I mean, I think that gets to a point where even if you have full trust in the authority that the person won't die, you're certainly hurting the other person a lot, though. So it's like, just because of an authority, you're at least willing to hurt a person a lot.
Well, that's the thing, though. Some of like, if I was sitting in this chair, even if like I had no kind of understanding of like the kind of broader, psychological experimentation, that occurs. So my specific understanding of like, the probability that this was just, an experiment to gauge my reaction was low. I think it's still housed within like the institutional trust could be like a more specific, I believe, like I trust this institution such that I believe that there is a low probability that I'm actually hurting someone, or that I'm actually killing someone. The experimenter.
But Jordan, I gotta jump in here. I'm
Sure.
Okay, but like, can't you imagine that we could like just tweak a few variables of the experiment to get it even closer to Nazi Germany? Like, for example, like imagine if Milgram would have said, okay, the learner in this case is actually a convicted rapist, and it doesn't really matter what you do to them. Like
the dehumanization.
Exactly. Okay. So like whatever ends up happening to them here, no one cares about this person. And
before we go down that, sorry, go ahead.
Okay.
Finish.
No, I was just gonna say, like, just by tweaking a few variables, you've already switched the mindset of someone such that they wouldn't really mind killing the person per se.
Yeah, I want to.
I think there would be some resistance to that. I'm sorry, Jordan.
Well, I want to get into the dehumanization aspect of that, but I think that we might also want to talk about that with respect to the Zimbardo prison experiment too.
Okay. In that case, can I make a specific point unrelated to like the dehumanization then?
Yeah.
Sure,
Which I wanted to table it.
Keep on this.
Yeah.
For a little bit longer. So here's the thing. I think the people who did put the dial up to XXX were ultimately, they were probably satisfied upon hearing, like, understanding that they actually never did hurt someone. They never did kill someone. And like,
you mean in the debriefing afterwards?
Right. Or whenever it became public, even if there was no deep.
There was a debriefing.
Right.
Could you
imagine if there wasn't?
Just send people out afterwards, just after like they thought they might have just.
How was your day, honey? I murdered a man.
Well, Giffen, that's the thing that I wanted to ask you about, though, is I think that the people's reactions betrayed the fact that they really did think that they were doing some harm.
I want to put this within the framework of risk. Like, there's a probability, and the probability of them actually, like, hurting someone was getting higher and higher as time went on. But there's still some, like, low chance that they weren't, and that chance was influenced by, like, their knowledge of the institution, right?
Yes, I agree.
And ultimately, they probably, if you were in that situation where you did bring it up to the XXX, ultimately your trust in the institution probably was only heightened after learning that, yes, we would never, of course, hurt anyone. Like, no one was hurt in the experiment. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah. So the interesting thing, though, is I think, we almost sort of have a curse of knowledge here, though, because we're like going into thinking about this from the position of having read about the experiments, which I think puts us at a slight disadvantage in terms of understanding what it would be like to actually be a truly ignorant person in this experiment, though.
Yeah, I'm trying to put that aside, and I'm trying to be a little bit more quantitative, like using like the risk assessment and like probability.
Totally fair, yeah.
But that ultimately is a factor, and like the trembling of people, like, influence that they were fearful, they were uncertain that what they were doing, that the trust they were putting in the institution was accurate, was well founded. But again, I'll try to make a more specific claim, and we can maybe comment. I think the trust of the participants in the authority of like the institution or like of the scientist or whatever I want to phrase this specifically.
Uh-huh.
It informed their probability that they weren't, going to kill someone, maybe. Whereas in the context of Nazi Germany, even if they did have, like, they acknowledged the authority, it was not informing the probability that they were not going to take a life, right?
Yeah, I would say that's true, because if you're going to literally shoot someone, it's a little more clear than
There's no doubt.
It's not like, the authority. It's all an
But-
illusion because I trust the military to not kill people. Like that's not a viable excuse. Whereas I think in the institution of, like, whether it was a high-ranking university, I think there is that probability.
Is the trust justified though? I mean, it turned out fine, but
What if it didn't? Yeah.
yeah, I mean, German scientists were committing, atrocities, and it's not that I can in any way equate the United States to Germany in this sense, but it's, the question is, how did people know that our institutions were better? Like, how did they know that to be true?
No, yeah, I mean they didn't.
I'm saying what like was
in it?
exactly, so it's
It was
not
informed,
justified if it's like
probably.
just faith.
I mean, it was
Like,
it wasn't like
like-
it was informed by a million factors, including kind of just cultural acceptance and reverence for the institutions. Maybe like you hear news about, like,
I'm not hearing justified things yet, but like just cultural, just reverence. Like you can revere many bad things.
You can again. So maybe another factor might be, like, you hear, well-respected individuals making, good moral claims from these universities as well. Like leading figures in the sciences or in kind of like politics or policy or society, just making these positive claims might inform your trust.
I'm sorry. How well informed do you think these people are, though, that they were, like, actively reading and staying up to date on, different moral claims and scientific claims emerging from Yale?
Very
or
little.
do you think they just knew of Yale as a prestigious institution?
90% that.
Yeah, because it's
And
like
trust in the fact that it would no longer be prestigious if there were, like, these horrible things going on.
maybe. I don't know.
I'd say it was a factor. I don't know if I can claim it was a high magnitude, but I mean, we can just spin this off into a broader, claim about prestige in general.
We can, but I think the interesting thing to think about, though, Giffen, is kind of two things. One is interesting that there was literally no cost to people not administering the shocks in the Milgram experiment.
Well,
because
no financial cost.
No, but no social cost either, because, like, this wasn't,
I'd say there's a social cost, and that would probably be the one of the major factors, because they had, corresponded with some, experimenter, who, was an authority figure, but, also another human, another, American. And you had given your word. I mean, they probably had a basic understanding that they were supposed to do this for science, even if it was, like, a super broad, right?
Yeah, I mean social cost in the sense that your community and your family and friends weren't sort of witnessing witnessing you in the same way that, your army regiment would be witnessing you if you didn't execute a Nazi prisoner in World War II.
Yeah,
right?
No, I would agree with that. I would say there's, like, I think it would be fair to say that some of, like, the recognition of authority in, like, the one person, like the experimenter, would be like a social cost you would have to overcome. Even if it was, like, nowhere near the magnitude of, like, your friends and family being right there watching.
Mm-hmm. In that sense, that's the only variable that Milgram's sort of examining, right? Like, is social obedience.
Right.
So in that sense, it's true. I just meant sort of like,
there is an emotional cost, though.
Yes.
Emotional.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah. Okay. So with that, it also, I think, None of us in this conversation are, and this is what I wanted to bring it back around to Adam's claim that he doesn't think that he would do it. Um, the interesting thing is that none of us right now are in a position to be under stress, under duress. There are no sort of there's no like adrenaline coursing through our veins right now. But you have to imagine that by the physical symptoms shown by these participants, they were experiencing those things. And I think that also changes the parameters of how people would act. But
I
so
do
Adam,
think I do think that's true,
yeah,
but I would also say that I it's gonna feel like I'm sort of like evading the question a little bit. But I just think that in the 21st century, given how much knowledge we have of the
yeah,
situation, I don't see myself continuing to that level.
yeah,
You know what I
and,
mean? Like even if this
yeah,
experiment had never come around and it was administered in the 21st century,
mm,
I think it would kind of fall into kind of that lame category of, being a little privy to what the
mhm.
experiment's about. You know what I mean? Without even like, you know what I mean? I feel like I'd have an idea of what's going on if I was told to pull the XXX lever on, you know what I
Be
mean?
like,
Like
nah,
after the danger, I'm like, this looks like a pretty bad move on my part, honestly. I don't know.
Okay, even
I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure I'd
let,
follow
let's
that now,
let's
but
prod you just a tiny bit, Adam.
sure,
Here,
go for it.
what if it was like, you know, given at your university, prestigious Cornell, by
Mhm.
a tenured professor, who was like running the experiment you knew, and he was offering it to like all undergrads to participate. Maybe the experiment itself, like the Milgram experiment, you like doesn't exist in this world, in this scenario, but like all of those other pieces are in place. He's like, hey, if you guys want like a point of extra credit, you can sign up and you can, be to possibly be randomly selected in as a participant in this study that I'm conducting. And it was like very, vague. And then that was the situation, the context within you being a part of this experiment. Did
Yeah,
that
I
change
mean,
your opinion at all? Maybe you would just
I
dial one tick further up before you stopped. Maybe
you
just
know,
XX.
no, so I certainly it does change my perspective. I mean, like being at a prestigious university, a tenured professor, proposes this experiment, open to all undergraduates, sure. But at the same time, it's like, I don't know. I just maybe I
A
don't.
lot
I
of
just don't.
faith you're placing in those terms.
well, it was only
Tenure, university.
65%. So it's not
Yeah.
unreasonable to think that you might be part of that 35.
Well, but I think it would have been even harder to be part of that 35% back in the day. So I'm not. I'm not.
Yeah,
I'm not. I'm not even saying in the minority. I'm just not even sure if it'd be a majority today. I think that's my larger claim. I'm not saying I'm special here. I'm saying that I
mm,
don't think the vast majority of people would follow through all the way until completion in this experiment. I don't get that sense
probably
anymore.
probably not. Maybe not today. I don't have a good reason for thinking that, but I kind of intuitively agree.
I
But
just think I don't think people are as submissive as they used to be.
that
I
might
think
be true.
Well, yeah, I think one of the kind of major contexts around discussion as it continues is like we do no longer, you know, blindly trust authority as much. We discussed institutions before, like we have lower institutional trust now than we have, in the recent past, and that's I think comes, you know, in parallel with general distrust of authority compared to 1961 or whatever.
Mm. No, that's definitely fair. Um, okay, so oh, I mean the only other point I was thinking about was um, I just think, maybe it's even true that like discussing this or learning about this experiment would make you less likely to participate in some analogous event in the future. But I mean, I couldn't even imagine being a participant in this and then being debriefed. I would never trust anything again after that.
Even though your suspicions, any like thought that might have crossed your mind while you were like in the experiment, just like come on, like what are the odds that this institution would really be having people come in and commit murder? Like you wouldn't be feel any little small vindication after hearing that like there wasn't.
I think a lot of people probably did rationalize it that way. They'd be like, oh, I knew all along, or something like that. Like, oh, of course they wouldn't. But I mean, this goes back to the question I kind of opened this with. It almost, I mean, for a lot of things, I mean, the higher the consequences, the less it actually matters if the people do rationalize it afterwards or not, right? I mean, like, for the 6 million Jews that died in concentration camps, it doesn't really matter that much if Nazi S members, kind of rationalized it after the fact or not,
Well,
given saying that no one actually gets harmed though in this situation, that you're told after the fact that
that's fair.
your trust in the university
right.
is vindicated almost.
Yeah.
If you had any that was like, pushing back against.
No, that's fair. I was just thinking, like, but I think it would open up like a subjective truth that like holy shit, like because I mean, think about, you walk out of like the experiment doors of the building and you're just like back on the street. I think I would be thinking about the fact that, wow, if that were real, I would have just killed someone.
Oh, I'd be a wreck. Like, holy
you know
crap.
what I mean?
Even if you never went to XXX, you like the audio feedback, if you like reflected on it, like this would suggest that he passed out.
Yeah.
Like he passed out from me.
Yeah, best case scenario, I shocked someone so badly that he passed out. Like,
yeah.
So I just think that subjective, that rude awakening that you are capable of doing those things under the right conditions would now, I don't know how long lasting that effect would be, but I have to believe for some significant portion of the people who went through it, they just had a more skeptical mindset going forward, just like a bit more. Yeah.
I think that's a fair enough point. They might be more skeptical to authority just because imagining they were closer than they thought they could have been towards doing something, even if in the end, any suspicion they had that it was, not fully the truth they were hearing, ended up being true. Like that'll be a crazy experience.
Yeah. Okay, so here's what we should do, because we haven't even gotten to the Zimbardo prison experiment yet. So we should do that real quick. But if I can, there's a 2-minute video I found on the Asch conformity experiment. Have you guys heard of that?
No.
Okay. It's related in really obvious ways. And you'll recognize that in a second once you see the video. But I just thought that this would be like a cool I think this would be like a very cool addition to the discussion.
The Asch experiment is one of psychology's oldest and most popular pieces of research. A volunteer is told that he's taking part in a visual perception test. What he doesn't know is that the other participants are actors, and he's the only person taking part in the real test, which is actually about group conformity.
Please begin. The experiment you will be taking part in today involves the perception of line length. Your task will be simply to look at the line here on the left and indicate which of the 3 lines on the right is equal to it in length. So, for example, if you...
The actors have been told to match the wrong lines. The volunteer will be monitored to see if he gives the correct answer or if he goes along with the opinion of the group and gives the wrong answer. In the first test, the correct answer is 2.
1.
2.
1.
Once again, the correct answer is 2.
3.
3.
3.
3.
3.
The Asch experiment has been repeated many times, and the results have been supported again and again. We will conform to the group. Again, we're very social creatures. We're very much aware of what the people around us think. We want to be liked. We don't want to be seen to rock the boat, so we will go along with the group. Even if we don't believe what people are saying, we'll still go along.
1. 1.
1.
Group dynamics is one of the most powerful forces in human psychology.
1.
So let me stop sharing my screen. So yeah, basically the Asch conformity experiment is like a super simple scenario in which like obviously, as you just saw, there was a right answer, and just by other actors saying the wrong answer, you could actually get people to change what they believed. Well, maybe not believe, but what they profess to believe about the length of the line. And so I thought that was a really interesting addition to the Zimbardo prison experiment, which we can lay out in a second, because it does inject that social component of obedience that the Milgram experiment purposefully segmented out.
That was a great video. It's kind of insane though. It's a bit insane that people. I swear people were bigger sheeps back in the day than they are now. Though I swear, like do any of us really feel that we would actually go with the group on that? Because that's a very obvious one. It's not like a tough math problem that you might be like, I could be wrong here. It's like, no, you're pretty much saying I don't believe my lying eyes. You know what I mean? Like it's I don't know. What do you guys think?
I don't think I would either, but I think that's because I mean, there's a difference between what we think the three of us would do, which not to sound like arrogant or like self-congratulatory, but like you got to think that talking about these sorts of things, obviously we've never discussed this experiment, but just you almost have to think that like always, thinking about how things can go wrong and discussing different like ways of viewing the world, more moral questions, that has to sort of put you in a stronger position. Besides the fact that oftentimes we like strongly disagree with each other for like an hour-long conversation, I think that sort of primes us to be people who are more likely to disagree in those situations anyway. Don't you think?
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
I don't know about the general population. So I agree with you, Adam. I think people were just a little bit easier to persuade back then, but I don't know. I think people are different today, but I don't think they're that different today.
That experiment just shocks me though. Like
it's insane.
Like people are literally saying like, I don't believe my lying eyes. I'm going to go with what the group says. Like,
so I can imagine myself wiping off my glasses on the first like pass, just like okay, maybe this is just like a smudge, a little bit of warping in the light, but and so I do feel like I've been a little inoculated to kind of like I feel like I would just say what I really thought, but who's to say I wouldn't in like a circumstance. I thought it was funny because maybe it's just the way the video was cut, but it looked like it was like on the second poster that he was trying to identify, he just collapsed and went with the group. Second,
no, he did. Yeah, that was the point. He answered what he thought the first time, and then everyone said the exact same the wrong way again. And the second time he just folded. He was like 3.
That was just amazing sheepery.
It like didn't even make any sense too, because he was vindicated. It was like he's like 2, and like afterwards the correct answer is 2, and I'm like, okay, he's gonna stick with this. His thought process. It was like, nah, just even though I was right, I'm gonna go just jump ship.
That narrator saying the correct answer is 2 was, I don't think that happened within the experiment. That was like the video producer that we watched.
Oh, I think Giffen's right.
So he didn't get immediate feedback. That
I got you.
He probably just the experimenter recorded everyone's answers and then, without saying who was right, flipped to the next board.
That would be insane, actually.
No, I got you. That actually clears up a lot for me there. Yeah, that clears up a lot.
That would be
that would be insane.
Yeah.
That man. Ridiculous. In that case, no.
Good clarification, Giffen.
That was good. Yeah, okay, so let's
not quite that sheepery.
Yeah.
Let's bring in the Zimbardo prison experiment, and then we can discuss it a little bit more and wrap up. Okay, so this was a decade after the Milgram experiment, and basically, so there was this guy, Philip Zimbardo, who was at Stanford. He was a psychology professor, and he did another experiment on obedience to authority, but this time the authority was arbitrarily self-created. So what he did was he invited, or he got people to participate in, I think it was supposed to be like a 2-week study or something. It was supposed to be shorter actually than what it ended up, or longer than what it ended up being. But again, psychologically normal individuals, these were all college students this time. So they were all of the same age group and same background. And basically what he did was he admitted, I think, like 24 or something students into this experiment and flipped a coin. And this information was privy to the students engaged in the experiment. So they know that their role in this situation was arbitrary. So he flipped a coin and heads was a prison guard and tails was a prison inmate. And basically he let this experiment sort of run its course, where he gave the prison guards, and this took place in the basement of like the Stanford Psychology Building or something, and they they made it out to have the appearance of a prison. They put in prison doors that locked with keys that were given to the prison inmates. The prisoners were given like prison uniforms. The guards were given guard uniforms with sunglasses and batons. And they were basically instructed to run the prison. And Zimbardo himself acted as the prison superintendent or warden. And basically, so this it gets a little complicated, but basically in the past few years, there have been some details that have emerged about how far Zimbardo himself actually went in encouraging certain behavior. And it's more than what he initially reported. So what he initially reported was that he sort of took a very passive role, and the guards began to like heavily psychologically and physically and sexually abuse the prisoners, with extreme rapidness to the pace. So on like day 3 or something, they were sexually humiliating the inmates, having them strip naked. Yeah, they had them like strip naked and do push-ups, and they chained them with extra chains to like remind them that they were prisoners. They dehumanized them, and this is what I wanted to like inject this experiment for with the dehumanization conversation. But they assigned prisoners numbers and forced them to refer to themselves as their numbers instead of their names. And so basically, the experiment got so out of control and so out of hand that there were psychological breakdowns amongst prisoners. People saying like, I watched like a video on this, and there were people shouting, like, "Fuck Dr. Zimbardo, fuck this experiment. Like, I want released from this. This is insane. I don't want to participate anymore." And basically they had to shut the experiment down on day 6. And so basically Zimbardo painted this as he sort of set this experiment up and let it run. And in recent years, what had come out was actually the fact that he very much prodded and pushed the prison guards to act in malicious ways. And he kind of underreported that, from what I understand, in the beginning of the experiment or when it was released. So I think we should discuss it with that in mind. But to be honest, I don't know how much of the details that actually changes. Because I think it puts it somewhere closer to the Milgram experiment, but not totally in the Milgram experiment either.
I agree. It does change the nature of the experiment.
It definitely does.
It does, in the sense that it's more about, once again, following authority.
Yeah.
Rather than just like innate human behavior. You know what I mean? Like that humans will naturally sort of devolve into kind of tyrants if given the opportunity. So
yeah. However, it's still telling in the sense that the direction was able to sort of unfold at the discretion of the prison guards. So I think it's importantly different than the Milgram experiment in that sense.
Sure.
But I guess it was just the whole thing was super interesting to me, and I know Giffen, I think it was maybe Giffen or Adam, I can't remember which one of you, that wanted to like discuss the dehumanization factor. But I just thought the implications of the uniforms in this experiment was equally important to the uniforms in the in the Milgram experiment with the experimenter wearing a white lab coat. I think the Zimbardo prison experiment would have unfolded very differently if people were just in their regular day clothes, like in a t-shirt and a hoodie, just walking around in like basketball shorts or whatever. Like it would just be different.
Sure.
Mm-hmm. And I think the numbers on the prisoners' uniforms is a direct relation to the numbers tattooed on prisoners in concentration camps. I think it just says a lot about how slippery that slope is between. Because the thing is, this is what I was talking about before. Also, with sure they knew that this was part of an experiment, but Giffen's. A lot of our discussion so far has been about Giffen's sort of objection that. The people in the Milgram experiment knew that they were doing this for an institution, and maybe Giffen was saying that there was some doubt in their mind about what was going on with the person on the other side of the wall. But in this experiment, there it was no doubt. There couldn't be any doubt because the people were right in front of them. And even if they knew that this was an experiment for Yale University or whatever, it doesn't really matter if you're beating someone with a nightstick, whether it's for like a Yale University study or not.
Yeah, Stanford. But yeah.
Sorry.
Slurring Yale.
Got him. Yale's just like, it wasn't us. It wasn't us.
Cease and desist.
But I'm curious to hear what you think about this, Giffen, considering your sort of faith in humanity a little bit in the Milgram experiment.
I wouldn't go that far.
Well, more faith, I guess, than Adam and I
have. What I will say is, I think I was more commenting on kind of like there being genuine reasons for people in general to have trust in authority or in institutions more specifically. My claim was. And in this case, this does take away my point about uncertainty, specifically because there's no wall between you and the prisoners, and you're just kind of cranking dials, and you're not in a watchtower or anything. You were there committing the acts most directly. You can see the feedback in the prisoner's eyes. So yeah, my concern with the Milgram experiment, that concern. Is not viable here. If that kind of answers your question towards me.
Yeah, it does. I was just curious what you guys thought about, because I think the Milgram experiment brings this up, but I think the Zimbardo experiment really sharpens this question of how, because Adam was pretty strong to believe that, he wouldn't have acted in the ways that most people did in the Milgram experiment. And I kind of agree with him. Honestly, I think that I probably wouldn't either. But of course, that's probably what most people would say.
Sure.
And I just so the Zimbardo prison experiment makes me question the robustness or the extent to which people's sort of morals or virtues or character traits are determined by the situation versus, some sort of non-arbitrary existence in those people themselves, right? So I guess I just wonder, because the people in the prison experiment were psychologically normal people too, and presumably these people wouldn't have described themselves as, malicious and sadistic. No one describes themselves
disturbed.
As that. Yeah, exactly. But yet, in a few days, granted with prompting from Zimbardo, but still, with mere prompting from a professor, that is not a lot when you consider what they were actually convinced to do, right?
Yeah, so I'd say it's scientifically a pretty large confounding factor. But as a demonstration, it's a pretty it's a barrier to overcome, to the actions, but it's a relatively small one. And I guess there's two things kind of to discuss. Jordan, you brought up kind of the point about shifting morals, to line up with the situation. People would be more, if they were in the position of power and they kind of got some sort of like sick pleasure, out of like their authority, they might be more willing to justify like actions that they would in a vacuum call like, immoral. And then there's a discussion about, you mentioned earlier, like uniforms and like how much kind of faith, like kind of, or social status we put in just like simple aesthetics.
Yeah.
I don't know if either of those you guys had a specific point on or wanted to discuss, because I find both of those kind of interesting lines of conversation.
No, they are. And the really interesting thing is not really how a uniform changes the way you interact with other people, but in this sense, in the Zimbardo prison experiment, how much it changes just how you yourself act as an individual, right? Like, have you guys ever had the experience of, this is obviously a super minor version of this, but you know how sometimes when you put sunglasses on or you're wearing sunglasses, it's way easier to not break eye contact with someone when you're talking to them, like versus when you're just like eye to eye naturally. Have you ever noticed that?
I'm sorry.
No, I don't wear sunglasses often, but that's a really interesting thing. If that's the
Repeat your
case.
claim.
Yeah.
Okay, so
It's
I have
easier to break eye contact when
No,
you're wearing.
No.
No.
So
You maintain eye contact for longer because there's like a barrier between kind of the contact, like the eye, like maintaining eye contact with their person. Kind of like looking behind a veil at them.
Exactly.
So,
It's not,
yeah.
you're not really like, so I wear sunglasses a lot in like the summer months when I'm outside or something, right?
Okay.
And it's just, I don't know, it struck me, and I have to hope like some of the audience is connecting with this point, but it's easier to, especially with people, whom you aren't friends with or something, because obviously like if you're just friends, you're just talking, but if it's like a stranger or something, it's way easier to just feel super at ease with just looking into the person's eyes, both when you're listening to them talk and when you're talking yourself, when you have sunglasses on.
Okay. I see what you're saying.
And it's super interesting to me that like the difference of just sunglasses versus not can change how comfortable you are with something as intimate as eye contact. And I can't even imagine how different being given like a guard's uniform and sunglasses and a baton would just, I feel like that would instantly just sort of, it wouldn't make you just begin beating people, obviously, but I think it would change your demeanor almost instantaneously in a mild way.
I totally agree with that. Yeah,
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah, I agree. I like that anecdote actually. So like Adam, I don't really wear sunglasses ever. But that is interesting. I believe, now that you explained it, and you clarified my misunderstanding, I believe that it's kind of like something to do with where we can derive confidence, like a kind of information kind of in your favor, like because like they can't see you but you can see them,
Exactly.
kind of like
yeah.
biased information. It's very
Sunglasses,
interesting.
yeah, sunglasses. That just makes a lot of sense that they
Yeah.
provide some level of dissociation. You know what I mean? It's just that does make sense.
I couldn't even imagine the psychological power that like I don't know, just kind of imagine that. You have to think, it's probably really, it's probably an amped up version of putting on like a sports uniform, right? Like because I used to play hockey in high school, and like Adam, you can really relate to this too with like putting on our wrestling singlets. Like in the act of like putting that on and tying your shoes, it was almost like a very it was like a super centering moment. Like the how obviously people have areas of their personality. I feel like the more prolonged and the more deliberate and the more juxtaposed the uniform you're putting on is from how you normally dress, the more it sort of closes your accessibility to those other areas of your mind, right?
Almost like a compartmentalization
Yeah, almost.
of like behavior or mindset. Interesting.
What do you think about that, Adam?
I think it's definitely true, and
Yeah.
I'm just thinking about the extent to which one's exterior influences one's interior. You know what I mean? Just like, I think it actually like, yeah, it's a big influence.
See, where do you think that influence derives, though? I'm curious what you have to say.
I don't know. I just think if you look the part, you'll begin to feel the part. So,
or at least act the part and then feel the part.
Yeah. So, I don't know. Like if I were to, I don't know. I'm trying to think of like a different example from my own life here.
A suit.
Come back
That
to
was-
me on this.
Oh,
A suit's a good one.
That's
A suit's a very good
the
one.
first
Yeah,
one that came
yeah.
to my mind.
Yeah.
That's a really good one. Yeah.
Don't wear
it's a
singlets
really-
Yeah.
frequently.
No, it's a really good one. Yeah.
So do
Hey,
you
you
do
just
you
do way
have
more
any
professional.
change? Yeah. Okay.
You're looking at someone. So we kind of were discussing it within the perspective of like you put on the thing, but we can even examine it on the other side. Like, why do we associate someone wearing a suit, with like some measure of, I don't want to say like necessarily trust, but kind of,
Authority or
I don't even know if I would say authority. I'm trying to find the right word. Respectableness.
Yeah. I think that's a good one.
I think
yeah.
might be the best. There's probably
Yeah.
a slightly more accurate phrase, but I think that's close enough. Even though I feel like most people would agree, horrible people can wear suits. Like if there's nothing, there's no logical strain.
I'm
we
kidding.
love-
It's like anyone wearing a suit is good in my book. But
It's an interesting thing though, like how much we've like really do internalize that association, despite like even if it was like there were no other factors, you didn't know a single other thing about this person, but just the fact, like if you saw them, kind of like in a first impression kind of thing, in a suit for the first time versus like in a world where you saw them like kind of just in sweatpants for the first time, maybe not combed hair or something like that, disheveled, like you would probably start to associate them with opposite characteristics almost, despite the fact that like the content of their arguments or their character in general would be unaffected.
And that's the whole premise behind that show Undercover Boss. Have you ever seen that?
Oh my god, I hate that show.
Honestly, it's a
I think that
stupid show, but
I think that show is corporate propaganda. I despise that show. Complete unnecessary like humanization of CEOs. I despise that show. This is probably
a dumb
minimum
show,
wage
but
workers who watch that show and come off thinking, at least they're like me, as they're like milking them dry. Sorry, complete tangent, but I hate.
No, okay, so it's a dumb show, but I was just trying to use it as like an illustration that like when people find out that that person is the CEO, they treat them very, very differently.
True.
In some cases, yeah. I mean, some people are just nice regardless, but
and some people don't care regardless.
Exactly.
No, that's a good illustration. Sorry, I totally went off.
No, you're
I've only seen the Key and Peele version of that like skit on that show.
Never seen that.
You've never seen that? Okay.
I've never seen the skit.
I'll watch it after this.
It's worth watching. It's fun.
Okay. So the here's what I wanted to kind of ask you guys. And this is like we can start to wrap it up with this, but do these experiments undermine any sense that you guys have of control or of agency in these atrocities? So for instance, I'm curious if you guys side with Browning more in the Browning versus Goldhagen debate, where, real quickly, and people can look this up on their own, but Goldhagen and Browning were these two historians, and Goldhagen attributes much more culpability to the German people for what they did, and he argued that it was sort of something about like the German people specifically, whether it was cultural. I think he probably deems it cultural. And Browning says, he kind of agrees with the Zimbardo view that, it's almost there, but for the grace of God go I, that the situation determines behavior to a huge extent. And that, yes, there are two sort of small groups of people on each extreme, where there are some small group of people who are true believers, and there's a small group of people who are defiant resistors. but that most people fall into the largest category of obedient followers, whether they're more or less on board.
Hesitant follower even.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just curious how learning about these sort of maybe undermined or didn't undermine your view of agency and responsibility for people like this.
So
you go ahead, Giffen.
Okay. Yeah. So I actually wanted to bring this up because I think when I first proposed this topic to you, Jordan, I kind of framed it, or I had like read something that framed it in the way of, immediately after World War II, kind of American, society kind of was like, wow, like I take solace in the fact that that couldn't have happened here. And then like it was like a decade or two later where it's like, well, really though, like I don't know that they're like, that it was exclusively kind of like a German thing. It's more of a human, an authority thing. So I would say that I think I would make a claim that German culture did influence, like have an influence in like the propagation of, terrible crimes and, genocide, specifically how it relates to the relationship historical between, kind of German identity and like German nationalism and militarism. But I will say that I do agree with the kind of larger, largely it's only like a small, like, propagating or mitigating factor, that the cultural things in most cases. And that, most people, Americans or German or otherwise would kind of fall under, like any large group of people are going to fall under that same kind of bell curve spectrum of people in these situations. Do you guys agree or disagree?
I mean, I generally agree. I mean, I fall heavily under the Browning perspective, to be honest. I just don't think populations vary too much. I mean, obviously one could say, well, you've got to take in, the societal perspective where, Germany and, surrounding nations had been, anti-Jewish for centuries, in fact, and that there was, just levels of hatred that had built up over generations. And you can fully acknowledge that, but it's like, given that cultural bias, anywhere else it would have happened.
Yeah.
I think so.
And even that cultural bias is sort of another, there but for the grace of God go I. Like,
exactly,
if you were born into that culture, then you would probably believe those things,
That's what I mean, yeah.
Yeah, I think we can generally agree on that point. But I'm curious to what extent you believe, like, if you have, like, an opinion, like, German culture specifically made it easier or, more difficult for atrocities to be committed.
I agree. I think it was probably an over-defined issue. So for instance, like, if you didn't have the economic collapse that was, in the
reparations
beginning, the reparations, but I mean the hyperinflation alone. I'm not sure that if you had any one of those variables removed, if this would have happened, or if World War II Germany was sort of like a perfect storm, per se. But I like to what we were discussing, I don't know, like I don't put any of those factors on the individuals involved, because I really do. I take Browning's perspective hugely. I mean, like, I think it's foolish to assert that, like, if the same conditions weren't, like, if you underwent those conditions, that you would be any different. Like, you may be, but you probably wouldn't be,
Sure, and I think I will say that there are cultural differences, obviously.
Oh, obviously. Yeah.
So maybe the same thing wouldn't have happened in the U.S. Maybe some different atrocity could have occurred.
Yeah.
It's just like, to take an extreme. I mean, just think about Japan during World War II. It's very easy to understand, the way in which they treated POWs. Their willingness to commit atrocities based on their culture. Like it does seem that, they were an isolated nation that assumed that they were the the direct people that spoke to God, and that their emperor, was a godlike figurehead, and that like there was
divine monarchy.
Exactly. Yeah. So there was really a supremacist perspective in Japan. And I also imagine there was something like that in Germany. And I don't know the history as well as you, Jordan, but I do imagine that based on, the collapse of the Weimar Republic, that, people were looking for a scapegoat, and I do believe everything aligned perfectly for something like this to occur. So
Yeah. No, it really did. And I mean, also the fact that during Hitler's trial after the I can't remember if it was the beer hall putsch or the Munich putsch, the fact that he was given 6 months during his trial to like just pontificate to the crowds about how this was like the Jewish problem was a huge factor in drumming up anti-Semitism in the German population. And the fact that in jail he was basically given a secretary, and was allowed to write obviously Mein Kampf, but other like just publications. It ramped it up entirely. But I think what you were like hinting at, Adam, is like the undergirding premises were things that no individual really controlled, like the economic collapse, the cultural anti-Semitism. So so the last question that I have for you guys is, and we can end on this, is it's been like, I think we all agree to a large extent that it is sort of just luck that we weren't put in these positions. But it's interesting to consider what people could what individuals can actually do to ensure that they don't follow into the next example of this, because I'm sure the world isn't going to be perfect from here on out. So the interesting thing is that honestly, I think learning about it is a really good fortification against following some of these trends.
I'd say learning about it, just broadly the events, would as a small mitigating force. But I really think on an individual level, like we were talking, you really need to kind of internalize the fact that you aren't, if you kind of start with the assumption that you could never do something like that, then a lot of that, potential mitigation of learning about the history is kind of gone, because you can just justify your actions based on that false assumption.
I meant the experiments. Yeah.
I'm sorry, say again, Jordan?
I meant the experiments, learning about the experiments, not the history.
Oh, I thought you meant like the actual history.
No.
I totally took that in the wrong direction.
I mean, I almost.
Oh, in that case, then yes, that would
okay.
Presumably lead.
I was like, really?
No,
you don't think it would help at all?
If it's specifically about like the experiment, that kind of necessitates almost self-reflection. So in that case, yes.
Yeah.
I just wonder what extent people participated in genocides after these experiments came out, because I mean, I would say in Western civilization there haven't been any genocides per se since these experiments were commissioned, but I mean, we still have like the Rwandan genocide, in Cambodia, in Armenia. Yeah. Even right now, you can argue that in Myanmar with the Rohingya population. So it's kind of like, I wonder to what extent people need these atrocities to occur in their own regions of the world to really be affected by them. To actually have reflection on them. I don't know.
Have you heard of Abu Ghraib?
No, I don't believe so.
Really? Okay. It was. Shit, I honestly didn't learn about it that much in preparation for this, because I didn't anticipate it coming up. But it was basically it was this section of the war in Iraq in 2003, I think, where it actually mimicked the Stanford prison experiment almost down to a T. So I'll leave this in the show notes, and if you guys didn't watch it, I would definitely recommend it. But there's like a 17-minute YouTube video on the Stanford prison experiment. And in the introduction, it gives like the first couple of minutes go over what occurred in Abu Ghraib in Iraq. And it's really, really disturbing, actually, how similar the videos are between the Stanford prison experiment and what happened in Abu Ghraib, where regular U.S. soldiers in Iraq did almost the exact same thing to Iraqi prisoners that happened in the Stanford prison experiment. Only this time they weren't prodded by like Zimbardo and an experimenter. This really, from what I understand, and take this with a grain of salt because I didn't really learn about it that much, but from what I understand, this did happen organically. Obviously, the tensions were way higher because it was two opposing forces in a war. So there's that, but from what I understand, it was a very similar example to the Stanford prison experiment.
Yeah, I would go. I wouldn't tie too close of a association between the two, both because again, war on two sides is a lot different than a group of like peers getting randomly assigned and you watching the random assignment. You can assume that like the people that were prisoners, were trying to kill you. So that, in that sense, that's different. And also, I think the extent of the prisoner abuse in the experiment. What was the name of the guy? Zimbardo?
Zimbardo, yeah.
Yeah, Zimbardo. That never really. What was like the highest magnitude of abuse?
Certainly lesser. I mean, no one got killed, obviously. Yeah.
Because I'm reading the Wikipedia page about Abu. What is it? Ghraib?
Yeah.
Abu Ghraib. Yeah, and it's like torture, rape, sodomy, murder. It's like that.
Yeah. No, people lost their lives.
I don't want to draw a false equivalence between like those two.
No.
As well.
But I think Adam's point from like way early on in the conversation though does still stand for this. I mean, both the stakes and the outcomes are ramped up, so it's analogous. It's not the same, but it's analogous.
It does sort of undermine what I said about people committing sort of inhuman atrocities even if their culture has been exposed to such things. Because obviously I would say many of these people that committed these atrocities, is it at Abu Ghraib? Is that a location? What is this referring to?
I believe Giffen.
Yeah, I think I believe that's in Iraq. So like these were Western culturally raised U.S. soldiers.
Sure. I mean, like, what's Abu Ghraib referring to, though? Is that like
I think that's the name of the...
It's a location, yeah, of the prison or something, yeah.
Yeah, so I mean, you still had people that learned about things like the Holocaust, that committed these atrocities at Abu Ghraib. So I think going back to what Jordan said, maybe the best remedy would be just education about these experiments, because learning the history of things doesn't seem to work, I guess, for people. I think it's less applicable to their own actions. Learning about what other people have done, in the context of like a war that occurred like 70 years ago, rather than like here's an experiment that peers like you have done. Yeah, and I don't know.
It's too easy to paint the other in historical contexts as evil. Also,
sure.
Say again.
I think it's also very, very easy to paint the other in any historical context as like evil, right? Like, I mean, propaganda at the time even did it. Like the Germans were painted as, like the incarnation of pure evil. But obviously the German citizens didn't think of themselves as that. And I think it goes to sort of like the banality of evil, where most people who are doing evil things don't think that they're evil things. They think that they're good. They're just mistaken about what that is.
I guess that even that though, I guess kind of assumes that people have enough self-reflection to view their actions as not evil, rather than. But I would argue that, or maybe I wouldn't argue this, but I would at least wonder to what extent people even analyze their own actions at all. You know what I mean? Like, no, I'm serious. Like, I just wonder if these people get caught up in evil things. And then,
that's definitely fair.
I'm not sure everyone like views their evil actions as good from their perspective. I'm sure a large percentage of them just act. So
like if you think about people who get caught in insider trading or something like that, I wonder if they're just sort of like, it started out with like a little bit of this, a little bit of that, and then all of a sudden they found themselves just like with millions of dollars, like, just like riding on this account and their jobs pretty much depending on it at this point. I don't know.
There's also like that one. You guys might know the vet's name. I forget his name, but he was recently pardoned by Trump. But he had been prosecuted for war crimes in which he posed with a dead opposing soldier, like in a photo, and like did other like horrific things like that. It was Gallagher, right?
Eddie Gallagher.
Eddie Gallagher. Yeah, that was his name. But yeah, I just for a guy like that, like when I hear stories about like, what certain US soldiers have done, it doesn't go through my mind that, from their angle, they might have felt justified. No, I think these are just bad people. I think they just acted and didn't even consider consequences.
See,
or consider the nature of their own actions.
See, I don't think it was just kind of like lack of thought. I think it was just misguided logic. Like these people probably thought it was, either good or neutral. Like you have to, I think most people at least have to come up with justifications, even if they are kind of excuses to us. Like, come on, these people that I was posing with that were dead, like they weren't really people. They're cave dwellers. They wanted to kill me. They hated like America. Like you can justify to the point where you kind of say you can, even if it's not like full justification. It's like it's not that bad. You can minimize it as opposed to just like ignoring it.
See, I almost think that it's sort of, I almost take like the Browning view to an even more extreme maybe then. Because I almost wonder if a lot of these things are almost non-cognitive acts, which is to say that like people aren't even like, they're not even rationalizing it, Giffen, or not even thinking about whether it's good or bad. It just sort of like the situation just creates these actions. And it's almost like people are vessels that carry them out.
I would agree that like kind of the environment creates like incentives and things like that makes it easier or harder for people to like go through with things. But I think individually, most people like do have to rationalize.
But how much of that is after the fact? Is what I'm wondering.
The thing. I think there is some inherent rationalization in the process as well. And maybe we can have a slight disagreement about that. Because it's easy to think like, yeah, these people are just saying things after the fact. And maybe they are in some cases. But I think that doesn't mean they didn't rationalize on the way there.
But couldn't we like kind of, I could push you a little further, like to more extreme cases, like
who's you?
Giffen.
Okay.
So I know this is a little bit off topic, but just to kind of push that line of logic, what about, the doctor who was sexually molesting girls, who were young gymnasts competing for the Olympic team?
Yeah.
Like what sort of justification real time could that doctor have been making about touching young girls?
I actually just.
Or do you think he just did it?
Giffen answer him, but I'll pull up the name. I just listened to Malcolm Gladwell's audiobook about this, Talking to Strangers.
Really?
Yeah, it was really, really good. I highly recommend it. But go ahead and answer, Giffen. I just wanted to plug that book.
Listen, I'm not going to say I agree with the actions, obviously.
No, of course not.
But if I'm trying to like think about what he would have rationalized, it probably would have been just like a minimization of the bad things and kind of like an exaggeration of the good things, right? Like, the bad things. Like, listen, everyone has like sexual desires, right? You can't really control them. Everyone kind of has a general understanding of that. It can't be like that bad. It's like I'm not really doing harm. Like you could just imagine, like just make atrocious. Like it's like listen, it's not like I'm like killing anyone. I'm not even really hurting anyone. And this obviously kind of comparing it to like an even worse extreme and like minimizing the actual bad. Obviously this is like a horrific human being with horrific actions. But I do think that along the way, maybe a lot of that was done even before the actual incident. Incident. Yeah, one of the words. A a lot of that might have been, built up over time. It's not like he was in this situation and then he started all of this, pontification. A lot of it was probably like kind of subtle, kind of in the previous 20 years, let's say, kind of like, dulling himself to like that kind of, the magnitude of the wrongness.
So I get what you're going for here, but I guess my real point here is trying to find a, some portion of the population that doesn't actually view their actions as right and can't justify them as right. So I can even push it to even, more extreme. Like what about someone that just, rapes and then dismembers young women, right? It's hard for me to imagine that person actually is able to justify their own actions.
See,
besides the fact that they, they don't care what happens to the person and they want to live out their own, sexual or,
horrific fantasies.
Sure, whatever. But
so here's what I'll say. It's not only that you can justify saying that you're right, it's sometimes it's enough just to like minimize the bad. Like it's not as bad as you think it is. Right? And that just like might be enough. In this case, he might be like, listen, like I'm not gonna say it's like, right of me to like dismember people. But like you could, I don't know. I'm trying to get ahead of like a sociopath here.
Yeah, but it could be worse. It's like I don't see how it could be worse. I mean,
yeah,
like,
but I think that's almost a different
worse.
question. Like if we get too extreme and like too sociopathic, it seems to kind of break down the question of, because I mean everything we've been talking about is about how ordinary people will do terrible things, right? And if you kind of paint the picture of like a sociopath, then if you tweak their psychology too much, I think it's maybe almost like it's crossing like a border into a discussion of sociopaths instead of normal people.
That's true, but I do believe the nature of the question has changed, though. I think your issue is with how this began, but I think this has evolved into, do people find justifications for their actions? And I'm not convinced across the board people do.
Yeah.
Like I do believe people act and, may later find justifications, but I don't believe people have well thought out reasons for what they do.
See,
but
I sort of agree with that.
Always.
I think I would agree, like kind of broadly, but with like kind of the asterisk that I think people kind of do rationalizations, and it doesn't necessarily need to be like I acted this way and it is good because of these reasons. It could be as simple as like, listen, I know like it's not as bad as it seems. It's sometimes enough. Like, listen, whatever good I was doing or whatever like end result came of it, kind of maybe exaggerate that a little bit and like minimize the bad is enough to kind of, smooth out like that difference, smooth out, worries. I think people do have to do that, even if it's not like during an action, like prior to kind of might set the stage for that. And during, I think people do justify it a little bit. Do in a lot of cases people act and then have to rationalize afterwards? Yeah. But you kind of have to imagine these people who were like, not even like the eager killers, but like the barely reluctant killers in Nazi Germany. You can't, like, they had to have rationalized or had it rationalized for them, like throughout most of their life, whether it's through like kind of nationalistic zeal, kind of militaristic praise, dehumanization of Jews. Like those are all rationalizations. Like there's clearly a lack of logic there, scientifically and otherwise and morally, but there are rationalizations that precede the action. I guess that's my broad.
Okay, but just not.
That makes sense.
Not necessarily conscious ones too. There could be subconscious rationalizations made that influence behavior.
I think subconscious factors might influence, but I do think there is a conscious rationalization in its cases. Even if, well, it depends on what you mean. Like if you have like a preconceived notion just from like your culture or your upbringing that like Jews are less than human, then you bring that up consciously as a justification to yourself, even if it's like internal like dialogue. I'd call that a conscious rationalization.
Yeah, I mean it is tough. Yeah, I will say that it is tough because we can't get in the heads of these people. We really can't. I do understand where you're coming from though.
Yeah,
Definitely
I'm trying to add a little bit of nuance. I do agree that a lot of times people do just kind
I
of
guess
act.
I guess I'm just not fully convinced people justify real time their actions always, and especially horrific acts, to be honest. But I think
That's
people.
fair. My argument might break down with
But
the more
mine might too. I because we can't get
It's hard
inside
to
the heads
say.
of these people.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know if Gallagher might have been thinking the exact same thing you said, that he might have been thinking, well, you know, these are, you know, I'm not saying this. I'm saying Gallagher might have said this, but internally, but he might have thought, you know, these are Arab dogs that wanted to take my life, that want to take the lives of the people that I care about, and this is pretty much like a hunt in a way. And after they're dead, I take a photo with with my kill. So maybe he did think that, or maybe he was just an idiot who decided he wanted to pose with a corpse. I don't know.
What do you think? Like, what do you actually think in this case?
What-
I know
what
you
do I
might not
actu-
know.
Well, that's
What do I-
pure
You
speculation.
think he just kind of was like acting, and then in hindsight was kind of like justifying it, or do you think he like was actively justifying it throughout?
I think
before.
there was an underlying hatred of Middle Easterners based on his background and his prior statements that influenced that action real time, such that he could or could not have been justifying, taking a picture with a corpse.
Okay.
I think it's equally possible that he could have just been like, shot someone, let's take a photo. Doesn't even consider it.
See, I
Because
think he
he's-
had to have rationalized it. Just even like a small, just like, listen, this is a dog. Like, it's
Maybe.
like, I think there was at least a little bit. I think it's,
Yeah.
I think it's, I don't want to say quite dangerous, but I think it's bad to just kind of like assume that people are just kind of acting blindly, because it's almost like taking away their like.
I think it's comforting to think that.
Yeah,
that-
exactly.
and
It is
I couldn't have done
Jordan,
that.
that's a perfect. I was
Yeah.
looking for these words to describe it. It is comforting
Yeah.
to think that they were just acting and then kind of like, and then like just kind of covering for themselves. But I think
Well-
the harsher truth is that these people have been rationalizing their thoughts,
Well-
and then when they had the time to act, they acted, and they had the rationalization path already.
Well, no, Giffen, I was saying I think it's comforting to think that this guy was like evil in some sense, or like a bad person intrinsically. Because I think the uncomfortable
I see.
truth, I think the uncomfortable truth is that like I just don't think any of us know how easy it is to slip into. Because like I don't know. Here's the thing: is like this is in no way to justify what that guy did. What that guy did is like heinous and despicable. But here's the thing: like
Trump
think
called
about
him a hero, but sorry.
that's disgusting. Well,
Yeah.
Foul.
but think about like the average, like think about how we spend like our days. Like we do not know what real stress is like compared to like imagine if we were the three of us were drafted right now into the US military, put through boot camp the entire time knowing that at the end of it we were going to go to Iraq or Afghanistan and have to fight for our lives, right? Imagine just like the fear of being I don't know, deployed there for months or years. I think it's really comforting to believe that someone who could do something like that has some intrinsic evil to him and that we couldn't do that. But I just don't know if we can know that or not.
No, I agree. I don't really.
Yeah.
I disagree entirely with the notion of kind of like a dichotomy between like good and evil. Like
Yeah.
because it's if you kind of internalize the fact that like there is a such thing as like there's like a drop of like black ichor that it's like within someone's soul.
Yeah.
Then you're like imagining in your head evil associating with like kind of like outside of reality. So
The
you'll never
contamination
identify.
of almost, yeah.
You'll never identify it when it truly is there.
Yeah.
Right. The scary part that is hard to believe, but the hard truth is that a lot of like these Germans weren't just like evil. They weren't born with the evil gene. They were just, complacent or complicit or, not good enough in their actions. Complacent, complicit, whatever.
Complicit, yeah. Yeah, I think that might be a good place to
They're
end
just
on
humans
this.
like you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that might be a good place to end on, which is I think the only thing that you can do is basically like, I don't know, try to learn about experiments like this, try to understand your own mind by being like introspective. I don't know, it's probably one of the best buttresses you can have against acting immorally. Um, Damn, this is a long episode, but I thought it was a good one. I didn't expect it to go this long.
This was good.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
To everyone listening, I hope you also enjoyed it. And please, if you want to learn more, I'll leave links in the description to all of the videos and articles that we referenced. So thank you for watching. Well, I hope you learned something from that episode and enjoyed listening to it. All of the show notes for the videos and the articles and the books we referenced and the background information can be found in the description below. If you want to support me and my work, you can do so by going to patreon.com/Jordan Myers. And everything that you donate on there will go towards funding the show and more episodes. You can also help me out in non-monetary ways by sharing this show on Twitter or on social media. You can rate it on Apple Podcasts. You can like this video or subscribe on your RSS feed or on YouTube. You can discuss this on your own show and comment on the video on YouTube or contact me with recommended guests or topics to cover. You can contact me at platoscavepodcast@gmail.com or follow me on Twitter at Jordan_C_Myers. And as always, thank you so much for listening and continue struggling to escape the cave. Thanks, and tune in next time. Plato's Cave is produced by Muckraker Media. You can find out more at muckrakermedia.org.